Stan and James, thank you for joining us for this webinar with D3 Security and Elastic on automation for security operations and incident response. Okay, I always like to start with a little housekeeping. So for everybody who's joining us, some information about the webinar today. It will be recorded and available on demand. If you registered, we will share the recording with you, and you will be able to access it, share it internally with your team. We'll have a live Q&A at the end. I would encourage you to stay till the end of the webinar, because that's when we have the Q&A, and the best question from the audience will receive a $50 gift voucher. The caveat here is that in the past, we've given more than one gift voucher. So if you ask good questions, you stand a chance to win. I'd like to now introduce you to our esteemed panelists. James Piteri is the Director of Technical Security Marketing at Elastic. Previously, he was a global solution architect designing security analytics for users and government entities. He's also the creator of witchfish.com and log4shell.threatsearch.io. James is passionate about improving security operations and driving through research on blue team strategies. Thank you, James, for joining the webinar. Stan Engelbert is from D3 Security. He's been here over 6 years now, advises security teams and leaderships at various global organizations and MDR firms on security best practices. Stan is also the current president of the Vancouver ISC2 chapter and the Vancouver Security Special Interest Group. In this capacity, Stan not just has knowledge and a wealth of information on SOAR, but also cybersecurity in general. And with this, I would like to hand it over first to you, James, to share with us the state of automation today and your thoughts on this topic.
Absolutely. Thanks, Amardeep, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here on this webinar today. Actually, for this slide, myself and Stan are going to chat a bit about these two topics. There's a lot of buzz around automation for good reason, especially in the security operations world. But there's also things where, sometimes people might feel it's like a silver bullet to do pretty much everything and anything. So myself and Stan are just going to chat a bit about these two topics to see, to discuss where we think the state of automation is today and what we see from some of our users and our customers. Also, where we feel it's headed, right? Based on the market, based on what customers have asked us for, and that sort of stuff. So Stan, what's your opinion on this? Where do you think the state of automation is today, especially in security operations perspective, right?
That's a great question, James. My personal opinion is, having been around it since sort of its inception. If you go back to, I guess, when it first started getting talked about from a security perspective, Splunk and others, and people were like, "Oh, well, let's automate certain items." It's come a long way. I think we're at the point now where a lot of the tedious tasks that especially would be considered like tier one tasks for gathering information and gathering intelligence and those types of things, I think, can be automated and make just the analysts' lives a whole lot easier. It was complex to begin with, but I think we're at the stage now where we're pretty comfortable going, you know what, tier one is, there's a lot of stuff in tier one that could just be simply automated, so the analyst has the information at their fingertips and doesn't have to sit there and swivel head and run between 4 different monitors and do a bunch of copying and pasting. I think there's still a lot to go on the journey for where we can bring the automation to in terms of I guess decision-making processes, I'd say, is now at the point where automation has to be kind of carefully watched, because you don't want to automate a bad process that just causes problems.
Yeah, I fully agree with there. I think automation has been really crucial to lower the mundane tasks, like you said, the stuff that tier one analysts have to do typically, but it's very repetitive, very boring. It's not interesting. So having the ability to automate that portion of the security operations role, and then leaving all the fun stuff, all the interesting stuff to to the human, right? I think that has been tremendously valuable for security operations teams. So fully agreement there. I also feel automation has really helped just lower the burden on teams as well. So
Absolutely.
a lot of people have felt, when automation was introduced, like, oh, we'll just automate everything. But that's not true, right? What you're really doing is you're complementing your existing team. We're never going to automate away the human, because there has to be a human deciding factor at the end
Absolutely.
of the day, because there's human intent behind an attack, right? So I'm a firm believer of that. So looks like we're of the same opinion there.
Yeah. I guess, maybe James, with your background in the area and in space, I think a lot of things. Having grown up in the era that I did with building computers and not everything being plug and play, what's your thoughts on that whole side of things, on the automation space being more plug and play? Is that something that you folks are running into, where people would like to see that? Where do you think that's headed?
Absolutely. So these days, when people say, especially security automation, they're looking as much as possible to not do like any coding. Back in the day, when there wasn't really platforms like D3 and others, you had to get your hands dirty if you wanted to automate. Like, you have to dive into the code, you have to, whatever coding it is, and work with webhooks and all this stuff. These days, everyone's looking for that point-click, like, workflow builder. No code comes up a lot as part of what people are looking for. And I think that's awesome to be able to do that, with the flexibility that if you wanted to go deep, you still can. I think having the best of both worlds is pretty good, because there are those teams and individuals who have the capacity and knowledge to be able to dive deeper and customize things if they wanted to. So yeah, I think let's say easy automation is definitely the top ask whenever someone asks for it, right? So definitely see that very often, especially with Elastic users and customers.
No, it's fantastic.
Should we push on to the next slide?
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, maybe, you're going to probably talking about to this as you go through, and we'll talk maybe a little bit about where the integration state, where Elastic and D3 is going at a later stage. But maybe I'll let you take over here the role of automation in terms of Elastic side of things. I think it would be a great lead into to what we're going to go into.
Absolutely. So, put together the slide just to summarize a bit of the discussion we had, but also, start, if any of you are on this webinar thinking about where you're going to start implementing automation or take your automation journey, here's some of the most frequently automated tasks that we see happening, and where we think it's most useful as well, especially based on the capabilities of Elastic and all the APIs it has, and also being able to use a platform like D3 to complement that. So first of all, myself and Stan already spoke about this, like the initial triage, right? The initial tier 1, level 1 task that you need to do. This is all about, hey, listen, if we had an incident, instead of having to manually check things like, okay, who's this user? What is this IP address? What's its reputation? How many times have we seen it before? These are all things you can automate as part of the initial triage process. So then when a human comes in, when an analyst comes in, they already have all that initial work done, and then they can dive deeper should they need to, and do more complex checks that a human should be looking at. So these are what we consider the initial triage. They think of them the typical level 1 or mundane level 1 tasks, right? Tied very closely to that is the whole concept of bots and interactions. Many security teams these days, they live in a Slack, a Microsoft Teams, Discord, whatever, which are all great tools for collaboration. So a lot of teams are now trying to automate the interactions with those tools. So if something does happen and you need to have what we call like a human in the loop workflow, you can use automation to create these interactive bots or workflows that will send a message straight to like a channel in these workflows, like a Slack channel or whatever it may be. And an analyst can then take deciding factors from there with a button or a form that will then lead back to the automation platform or to the SIM or whatever you may be using, right? These have become extremely popular. There's a lot of content. The actual platforms themselves have made it really easy in terms of, whether you're using Slack, Teams, Discord, whatever it may be, they're all one big API. So they've made it pretty easy to be able to build this stuff with automation tools like D3. And then, of course, there is the remediation and follow-up actions part, right? Especially if you've done all the initial triage in an automated way, you've gathered a bunch of deciding factors. You maybe had some human in the loop workflow stuff, and then yes, as part of automation, you might want to take a responsive action like, hey, let's take this IP address and block it on our firewall. Let's I don't know, let's lock out this user. Like these tasks that you'd want to respond to prevent the bleed or to prevent more malicious activity happening within your environment. So that, of course, is a big part of automation today. I will say, of course, whenever you do a task like this, make sure there is enough context to take that action. The last thing you'd want to do is randomly start blocking things or randomly start locking out users without the right amount of context or without the right amount of proper procedure. And what I always like to tell users is, listen, if you don't have a manual procedure to do this today, you're probably not going to be able to automate it. So think about it that way, right? There are certain steps you should take before taking these sort of actions. Stan, anything you want to add to that or any of these topics?
I think you hit probably on one of the most important points just with that last one is the fact of the procedural side of the house. And I've seen it over top of the years where people want to implement automation and they're looking for the advantages, but you really do have to have that process in place, and that might take a little bit of work. But it's understanding where the automation can help in that process. And again, it's those checks and balances, James, that you talked about, having the context, being able to run a workflow and having a user go, okay, we've got the workflow down, we're getting the correct context. Now let's go ahead and just hit that automation piece and start automating it, because it's that part of it. When you don't have those contexts, we're replete with stories on people that just have decided to automate processes, and it just a process that isn't tested properly that's automated is just, I mean, you've basically done something at scale, which is going to cause you a lot of problems. But I think that's probably one of the best things about this side of it is that get your processes in place and then look at where you can automate, and you're going to find that the automation side of it comes a much easier when you have an idea as to what you're working with.
100%. And sometimes, like as Elastic, we have our endpoint technology, which allows you to take responsive actions. And a lot of people ask me, "Oh, can we just automate like a host isolation?" Or well, you could, but I don't think it's a very good idea to do it blindly, right? If you just randomly start isolating machines as the result of an alert triggering without the proper checks in place first and doing some initial triage or whatever, you might run into situations that are worse than the alert or the incident itself. So yeah, long story short, procedure is important. Even when you're doing it manually or automating, you need to have procedure.
Absolutely.
Can we move on to the next slide? All right. So obviously, we're two vendors on this call. We have Elastic and D3. So what we're really going to show now, Stan is going to give us a demo about how the two platforms work together really well, using something like the detections triggering on Elastic and D3 picking up those alerts and then running through a workflow with them. So why don't we hand it over to Stan to walk us through this demo, and he has something really cool lined up for you all to see.
Perfect. Thanks, James. So Amardeep, I'll go ahead and let you pass me over the ability to share. Perfect. And I'll just use my compatriots as a tech check and see it's coming through. Perfect.
Yep, I can see it.
Okay. One of the things I want to also point out, especially with on the Elastic side of it, it's a fantastic platform, scales amazing, which makes it a really great partner in terms of our scalability across both the MSSP and enterprise space. So I'm going to start with an ingestion that's come in through Elastic, and just the amount of information that comes in, and just the depth of the data that's able to come through. So this is the raw ingested alert that's come through. We've got a lot of pieces of information in here. The idea around this is that there's been IP addresses and traffic detected that's come into here, and what we're going to do is we're going to push it into a workflow And I've got this paused in this particular sense because I don't want to just hit a button and everything goes, and then we wonder what in the world's going on. I want people to really understand that how the platforms are functioning together and how it's working. So there's a lot of pieces of information in here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it into a workflow. We're going to look at the different actions that can be done. We talked a lot about automating the tier 1 triage and different pieces like that. So let's go take a look. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and escalate this. And this is essentially pushing it into what we consider an incident type within the D3 platform. I'm just going to choose one here, and we're just going to move it over into this particular space. So I'm going to go ahead and hit escalate. And it's going to create an incident. It's going to start a workflow, and we're going to actually walk through that workflow and see everything that's been done and what happens within that space. So I'm just going to go into it here, and we'll open it up. I'm going to go just into the workflow side of it. So for this particular demo, I do want to focus just mainly on the workflow side of it, and then we're going to talk a lot about how Elastic and D3 can work together and what different items you have for capabilities. So I'll create this item. We're going to go into the suspicious network traffic workflow here. So there's a lot of items and this really is the automation portion of it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what these items are. We're going to go and look at it in the depth of the data side of it. So that alert that you saw come in with that data set in here, what we've done is we've extracted some of the IOCs out of there. And the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to do a couple checks in this space. So we've done a reputation check. And again, I'm using certain technologies in here. So if I refer to like recorded future or virus total or abuse IP, understand these can be swapped around for really any technologies that you want to utilize in the space. So we've got this IP check here. I've got a number of result pieces that have come back. So we can see what's come through. It's got a fairly low risk level. But we've also gone and done a quick check to see if there's any reverse IP looks. So is there any associated domain with this particular one here? We don't have anything come back from. So right now it's looking pretty okay. As another particular check in here, it did come back with a medium score from the one tool. So I wanted to go back and just do a quick check in terms of its overall domain. So let's go take a look at the actual address block to see if there's any items that are coming back that we may need to be aware of. So we've got a lot of confidence scores here that are coming back. So some of them, for how, what the abuse IP confidence scores are. And so I want to do one more check based on this block to come back and take a look at, anything else that might be coming up. So we've got another reverse IP lookup across this block. And we do have some items that are coming up that may look a little bit on the suspicious side of life. So from there, we've got that information that's come back. We're going to do an additional domain check on these particular items. And we're going to come through here. I'm going to just grab this one. And I've come back, and there's some unusual items that are coming back from this particular one. You can see here, they've got its typograph similarities between disagreement RU and possible targets. So it could be a typo squatting. It could be something that's coming back that we want to kind of be a little bit careful of. As James mentioned, having the human factor in here. So in this particular one here, I've left this as a manual task to be performed by an analyst. But again, understand that this is something where, depending on the degree of severity, you could have checks and balances in here based on maybe it's a high or a critical. Maybe you want to automate those ones, and anything that comes through like a medium space, maybe have an analyst do a double check on it that you actually want to go ahead and go through the process. So from here, we're going to move through, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to go and start running a couple other things within the space. So one of the cool things that we can do, actually, I'll back up here. Once we've done this particular check, we can actually query back into Elastic and pull in additional pieces of information based on these types of queries automatically. So I've limited this particular one to bringing back 3. We can see the results data for all the different items that have come back. If I want to look at it in its raw JSON format, I can do that. But I can pull this data back automatically from Elastic. So the two tools can actually interact as they go through, both in terms of data getting moved to D3, but data getting pushed back to Elastic and so forth. So it is a very bi-directional integration between the two tool sets. So I can pull additional information down. I can set different workflows up based on what's found in this particular area. And I can also then go back and search, if there's any results coming back on any of those domains. So maybe I want to go and do a domain check on this particular one and see if there's any results that have come back. So there's no results. So haven't found anything that has that particular domain, which is a really good sign. Moving from there, I've just gone ahead and we've extracted some host names here. Are any of them part of a VIP asset check? So as James and I were talking, one of the things we talked about was like you may not want to automate the process of disabling, users automatically within the system. One of the things we can do is take a look to see if that particular associated host name within the environment is actually part of an asset list. So is it maybe a VIP? Is it somebody in the company that maybe's got access to either sensitive information or maybe it's got access to financials? This is maybe where, maybe you do want to take a bit more of a proactive stance and go, just in case it might disrupt their workflow or it may cause them a little bit of, headache, but maybe we're going to do it and take a proactive step on critical level assets and do a disable on the account, just in case, and send a notification out to a Slack team or something else on that side so that people in management know that what we've done, and hey, can we do a quick double check, and we'll just automate the process of reinstating that account as part of the workflow. Versus other ones where maybe if it's not part of that, we're just going to send a notification out to the team. Again, could be Slack, could be email, could be Teams, whatever it might be. That hey, there's a non-critical asset. Here's the username. This is what we found, and just update the team. Maybe want to reach out for permission to go ahead and do that particular check. The other really cool thing is that we can do things like generate a case within Elastic. So we can actually push all this information back into an Elastic case, set the case up, and we've got a case created. We can go and adjust the data for what we want to send back into Elastic for this created case, and just really full circle the entire process within the space of both technologies. And this allows teams to save a lot of time. Cutting and pasting it's part of everyday life, but especially in the security operation center itself and for other teams, it's just such a time waster, especially on the areas where we can do these things in an automated fashion, where teams don't have to sit there and cut and paste individual pieces of information or blocks of information back. You can just simply automate it, have it there, and then the pieces that they do have to fill in, you're limiting what they have to do. Other things that can be done within the space, you can generate whole reports back out. So if I want to go and amalgamate all the information into like a single PDF or a Word document, to then send out afterwards, that can be done as part of the system as well. So this is what I would consider a fairly simple workflow with a number of different options based in there. But the point is to give people an idea as to what the two technologies can do together and how they can really help. Even for specific workflows and use cases, because it's all about what areas in the procedures are gonna take time, right? If we can automate the capability of doing back lookups into Elastic, if we can automate the process of sending out notifications into other areas, James listed being able to disable endpoints via Elastic. It's another part of the integration that we have with them. So you can isolate the endpoints and reestablish the endpoints at that particular stage as well. So those are part of capabilities within the tool set. So I think what I'll do there is I did a lot of talking, and maybe I'll stop. James, maybe I'll give you a couple minutes to go ahead and just your thoughts and comments in here.
I think that was awesome, Stan. Thanks for running us through it. And again, for anyone on this call, hopefully you can get an idea of how many mundane tasks that Stan automated away here, right? So a lot of searches, a lot of things, like a lot of copy pasting away, which can be error prone, creating the case back in Elastic. So these are, we're going to highlight some more of these capabilities that you could do. But these are all things where, typically this whole workflow took a couple of seconds to run, right? From an automation perspective, manually, this stuff would have taken a long time, just because, it's human nature. So hopefully you can see, like, you're reducing, the mean time to respond as well, which is a big factor in most organizations, right? How can we make sure when something does happen, we respond quickly and, take action quicker? So yeah, thanks for running us through that, Stanley.
Yeah, I want to stop sharing. Amardeep, I'll hand it back to you for the share screen. You're on mute there, Amardeep.
Okay, quick tech check. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay. And now we're quickly going to bring up the screen. Can you guys see the screen?
It's just waiting to share.
Yeah,
there it is. Perfect.
Okay, excellent.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the pipeline side of D3, because this, I think, is it's a unique value proposition to D3 on the side of it, and it functions together with the other technologies. So where I started the demo off with was with the initial ingestion side of it. What the pipeline allows you to do is to take telemetry pretty much from anywhere, do that data ingestion, but normalize the data set as well. So if you would have noticed, it was like normalized into our JSON set, but we can extract different types of artifacts out, much the same as I did within the playbook. So a lot of the tasks that James and I were talking about, those can be automated. We can do automated threat intelligence lookups, CMDB. We can do event correlation at that particular space. Another thing that we can do on the end of the pipeline is really the reduction of false positives. So what happens when you've extracted those items and alerts come through and everything's at a low criticality? Maybe we just want to dismiss it and push it off into the side queue. It doesn't delete it out of the system. It's there if it needs to get back correlated again. Because as you know, people in the space, a URL or domain might not be initially malicious when it pops up. It might be a number of weeks. Maybe it's a month later or longer, where this type of information, you might need to check back and pull it into an ongoing investigation to see when the first time it's actually been within your environment and detected, versus other ones where we can then push them into a full incident for handling. And then again, you've got that full workflow back and forth between tools like Elastic and D3. So this idea of the event pipeline provides a lot of power, a lot of automation, and specifically in the triage, especially in the tier 1 triage. We love it when our customers come back to us and go, you know what, we've utilized the pipeline, we've gotten the majority of our analysts off of their tier 1 duties, and now we're able to take them and actually move them into tier 2. We're able to give them more interesting jobs to do. They're happier. They're not sitting there buried under a load of alerts and just doing the same copying and pasting and searching that they would normally in a normal situation. I'm sure James can talk about it as well. It's that the finding good talent these days is hard at the best of times. It's a pretty competitive market, and the more that you can go and help your analysts and just give them more interesting things to do, the happier people you're going to have. So, yeah, ready. Go ahead and move into the next slide and go into there. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I was just saying, couldn't agree more there. Keeping teams happy is pretty important, right? And the way you keep them happy is keep people interested. If someone comes into a job and they're doing the same thing day in, day out, number one, they're not going to be interested. And number two, they're not going to be encouraged to do their job properly, right? They're just going to get through the day and then that's it. So they're not going to actively, want to spot new threats or that sort of stuff or be creative. So this stuff is really, really important. So Stan just walked you through their, D3's pipeline workflow and everything they can do there. And you saw, again, as part of the demo, what that looks like in practice, right? I'm going to highlight some other APIs which Elastic has, which can be used in context with something like D3's pipeline and automation capabilities. So in Stan's example, we spoke about two of these here. One is the creating a case and interacting with cases in general. So for those who are unfamiliar, Elastic has a full case management capability which allows you to keep track of an incident, add graphics if you need, markdown syntax, attach your alerts to it, assign users, that sort of stuff. So there's an API for all of that. So you can, if you wanted to, automate the whole case workflow, or at least bring it up to a stage where then perhaps once D3 did its work, someone can just then go into the case and do the level 2, level 3 tasks maybe for that incident. Stan also, as part of the workflow, he ran an Elasticsearch query to check if we've seen this data or this particular IOC over time within Elastic. So that's another thing, right? So you can pretty much automate any kind of search within Elastic. So this is really handy for checking things like what we call prevalence. If something did happen and we have a particular IOC, an IP address, a hash, whatever it may be, how many times did we see this before? That's a typical task of an analyst, right? Has this been in our environment a while? So being able to automate that sort of stuff is pretty important. And of course, we can do that. Something else we can automate, which is pretty cool. One of the things Elastic has as part of its agent is what we call our OS Query Manager integration. For those of you who aren't aware, OS Query is a phenomenal tool, just built back by Facebook or Meta back in the day. And what it does is it runs on a system, and it turns that system into a queryable relational database. So you can do things like, hey, select star from logged in users, or select star from patches, right? So you can collect information at point in time from when the incident happens. And it's really, really handy. So for example, if an incident happens and you want to check, well, who was logged in at the time, or what were the latest patches installed, or what processes were running, that sort of stuff, you can actually automate these OS query style queries with the API. And if you wanted to, feed the results back as part of the further D3 workflow, or put the results in the case. So these are all really, really cool things you can do with OS query. And similarly, you can do that for our endpoint actions. Stan and I were mentioning, as Elastic, we do have a full endpoint detection and response capability, which includes response actions like you might expect, killing processes, isolating hosts, and so on and so forth. So again, with the right context and with the right procedure in place, you can automate some of those actions using that API as well. But even more so than that, even just the policy that endpoint runs. So imagine you're in a situation where, let's say you have one of our endpoint policies, which you've enabled certain amounts of data collection on that agent, right? Now you go through an incident and alert triggers for that host, and you want to start gathering more information, or you want to change a prevention mechanism. You can automate that. You can automate the changes to the policy. So if we weren't, for example, collecting DNS events, we can automate the switch to turn that on as part of the workflow, which means we might be able to gather more information or get more context for what's happening on that machine. So that's a really, really powerful thing. And then there are some others like our lists functionality and exceptions, which are pretty cool. This is more about maintenance. Like, let's say you go through that workflow and, based on the checks that we're running as part of the D3 pipeline, you notice that, listen, this is a benign finding. You can then just automatically add this as an exception so it doesn't trigger again, right? Which is pretty cool. And then lastly, this is something not a lot of people think about or know. Like, if you happen to be running in our managed service, so our Elastic Cloud, you can actually automate the maintenance of that of your cluster. So for example, if you wanted to, let's say you have an alert and at this point in time, whatever this attacker is doing is generating much more traffic and volume than usual, which means you might need more capacity to handle that load. So you can actually automate the expansion of that, as an example, or automate some other things like provisioning of new clusters, or especially in an MSP context, this is really powerful to be able to do. You can actually use a whole workflow to onboard a new customer, for example, which is pretty cool because you can automate the creation via a D3 pipeline. So these are all some things to think about. So hopefully this starts giving you some more ideas of what you can do with something like D3's platform and all the Elastic APIs which are available to you. Can we move on to the next slide, Amardeep? So what you saw today as part of Stan's demo, he was basically, as part of the workflow, querying what we call our alerts index and grabbing all the alerts that we're triggering and working on the pipeline from there. There is also another option if you wanted to. For any time an alert triggers, you can invoke what we call an action, Today, that action to interact with something like D3 requires what we call the generic webhook action. But D3 have been working on, in conjunction with Elastic's development team, a native D3 connector, which is going to be great, right? So if any of you are already using D3 or thinking about using D3 with Elastic, it's going to be much easier to get started because it's going to be a native D3 connector pretty soon, right? And it's going to look like this. So you just set up your D3 connection and then you just transfer your payload and you're pretty much good to go. So it's going to be a much more streamlined experience. And you can, if you wanted to combine both methods, or you choose how you want to run it, but we're going to make it much, much easier to work with D3 as well. Next slide. I think we're at the end. I think we're just Q&A.
Okay.
So,
thank you, James, and thank you, Stan, for that wonderful overview. And now, for the people who are here with us on the call, if you have any questions, you can type them either into the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll be more than happy to answer them.
this is your opportunity.
We're going to wait about 30 seconds. I think people will need some time to type in their questions.
I think just going back while people are typing that in, James, the last part with the connector, I think is a really good point. This is where, those types of things become much more plug and play, so to speak, as we start building just closer integrations on that side of things. It's exciting to see those types of things happening, where just the tools can be more natively connected and just provide better capabilities for the clients. I think it's fantastic.
Absolutely. Like we try and do everything we can just to simplify the workflow, make it easier to get started, potentially a bit less daunting if you've never done it before, right? So anything we can do to help there is definitely value add for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if anyone thinks of any other questions after this webinar, maybe you can't think of anything right now, just remember you can reach out to either us as Elastic or D3 in several different ways. As Elastic, we have, of course, our dedicated Slack workspace, which you can join and ask us any question you like. I'm on there quite a bit. If you have any questions for D3 that you'd like to pass on through there, you can as well. Stan, Amardeep, is there any way anyone on this webinar can reach out after as well, just in case they have any follow-up questions?
So the best way to reach out to us is through email, which is the email ID on the screen, marketing@d3security.com. And whatever questions you have, we'll be sure to answer them. As I mentioned before, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar with you. So if you want to share that internally, or if you have questions after the webinar itself, you can definitely send them over to us, and we'll be happy to answer the questions to the best of our ability and refer to James for the ones we are unable to answer on the Elastic side.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
So I guess there are no questions, and we can probably close the webinar now. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and thank you for your time. I hope that you saw how well D3 and Elastic work together, and this could be something that influences your decision on which SOAR product to consider when you're, kind of highly dependent on Elastic. Thank you, James, for taking out time today. We really appreciate you joining us. Thank you, Stan, for talking about D3, giving us that fantastic demo and showing us the capabilities of the two platforms working together.
Yeah, my pleasure. James, thank you so much for taking time. This was fantastic being on here with you.
Thanks for having me. Likewise. All right. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.